Oh, cool, and I can see stuff too. Hooray. Anyway, so just out of curiosity, for those that are in the room right now, how many people here are actually, like, working in a linguistics department, active linguists? Raise your hand. Woo! Yay! Cheer for yourself! Hooray! There are linguists about. So, of course, you're probably then well familiar with the fact that when you tell people, like at a bar or some sort of social event, what you do, the first question you always get is... Yeah, so how many languages do you speak? So you're a linguist? How many languages do you speak? That's, of course, the first question you get. It's kind of ironic that probably the linguists that are in this room have, an actually pretty interesting response to that. Then you have to follow it up. Well, I actually do speak a lot of languages, but that's not it's not because I'm a linguist. A linguist means blah, 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 blah. And then they've stopped paying attention to you. They go off to talk to somebody else at the bar. Anyway, so I've discovered that I have a version of this question that I get because I am a language creator. And that version is this: are you fluent in the languages that you create? Now, this actually seems like a really fair question, but it has kind of an interesting answer, so I thought that I would go into it today. First, for those of you who are totally unfamiliar, first, I have a laser pointer. All right, anyway. So for those unfamiliar, I create languages for television shows. So for Game of Thrones, I've created these 3 languages. For Defiance on Sci-Fi, I've created 4 languages, and I also got to create the writing systems for them, which was a lot of fun. For a show called Star-Crossed that ran for 1 season on the CW, I created, this language. What comes next? Right, Thor: The Dark World, I created a language, that's it. For Dominion on Sci-Fi, I created the Lishepus language. For the 100, I created the language Trigetis slang, which is fun. It's an evolved form of English, so it's just all English, basically. And for Penny Dreadful, I created the Verbis Diabolo. And then for a new show I'm working on called Emerald City on NBC, it's coming next year, I got to create 2 languages, so that'll be nice and exciting. Anyway, when I sit down to actually create a language for a show, this is like the super short version of what I do. Basically, you create the entire grammar and phonology of the language. You create an initial cache of words. You create a writing system. And then after that, once the grammar is done, and you can effectively translate whatever you want if you have the words for it, then my job switches to just becoming a translator. The only difference is that I'm translated in the languages I create, and if I don't know how to say something in the language, it probably means that I don't have the word for it, so I just have to create it via the process that I usually do. But that's the kind of the short version of what I do. But what I wanted to show you is what it means to actually create a language and what kind of competence you get in that language after you've done it. So to show you, I'm going to give you a concrete example. This is a language I created just last year for Sci-Fi's Defiance, and it's called Kinukaz with a nice ejective K right there. That's the ejective K. He has a fancy hat. Anyway, so this is a language I created for Defiance, and when I start, basically I start with kind of a notebook like this. I'm just testing out ideas. And what I usually start with is some test words. You can kind of see them up in this region over here, where I just come up with some sort of phonological form and I give it a meaning because I need some words to test grammatical ideas out on in order to figure it out. So like on this page, for example, I put text in yellow. That means this is not actually what ended up in the real language. I had something written like this down, like man eat leaf, and that would mean something like man eats a leaf. It would mean it habitually. It doesn't have any other verbal morphology attached to it. And so what I thought is that I could do something like this. So this is basically the eaten leaf got put together, and this would mean the man eats intransitively. That is, I came up with this idea that this happens in other languages, where you would take some sort of a generic object and it would become inflection on the verb, and it would actually distinguish between the transitive and intransitive form of the verb. Transitive being if it has an object, intransitive if it has no object. So it would just kind of take this generic object and it would become, verbal morphology. And then if you wanted to do something like this is probably best described described as an anti-passive construction, perhaps. Vaktinzit and then kibol. So it's kind of like, man, eat leaf. The leaf is still on there technically, and then by, bor. So it's like if you were to take the intransitive and turn it into a transitive verb, that would be how you would do it. Kind of an anti-passive, even though this is this is an accusative nominative language, not ergative absolutive. Anyway, so I like that idea, and once I kind of saw that, okay, I think this is going to work with this language, then I actually set about creating the real forms. So what I started with is these generic words over here. I came up with essentially, I think it's like 10 verb classes, so that you would take a generic object for a type of verb, and it would attach to the verb to become its intransitive suffix, and it would separate the verbs into kind of like 8 or 9 or 10 basic verbal classes, depending on what its typical associated object would be. And so I came up with some of what these objects would be. They're, I think, in English here, like instruments, vehicles, places, things. This is the lower half of that page, because I've never learned to take pictures in English the right, or with the iPhone the right way. I always take them the wrong way. So anyway, so that's, yeah, so those are the basic words, and I would like toy with coming up with forms for them. Then once I had them, I started essentially making these suffixes. So you have a verb like suv, right? And then suvak would be intransitive. We have transitive on the left, intransitive on the right. And that suffix comes from a word meaning man. So this would be just one type of a verb class where the expected object is some sort of a sentient being. And in this case, the generic word they took is the word for man. All right. Another one, top and topin, and then the generic word was sin, which means thing. Tem, temul, the generic word was hul, food. And let's see, I think I have one more. Oh yeah, ap, and then abar, and then the generic word is place. So I kind of had that system going for verbs, and I really liked it. After that, I turned my attention to nouns. And so when nouns are modified, they kind of do a similar thing. They can take a suffix in a very particular way. So this is the word zor, and zor means eye or eyes. I found that it's actually, when you're working in television, it's very, very useful not to distinguish plurality on your nouns, because you never know if what you're referring to in the script as plural is going to end up being singular once they actually shoot it. Because, the vagaries of production will change. So suddenly you're talking about, like, take those 3 guys with you to, go over there, whatever, and I'm supposed to translate that. And then suddenly on the day of production, they were like, oh, we don't have enough money for 3 extras, we're just going to do 1. But they don't come back and ask for a different translation. So it's like much better if you just say, like, man, it could be either, whatever. So, eyes. In this case, what I created are affixes that you can add to nouns to specify that something is specifically singular. You would call it a singulative. I think that we have it in Welsh is one language that has a singulative. And depending on how you analyze Arabic might also have one. So zonit would be 1 eye. And zorik, many eyes. I'm sorry, I have the stress around zonit, zorik, like that. That's like kind of like an emphatic plural rather than just a generic plural. And also, if you modify it with an adjective, there's a closed class of adjectives, like in Hausa. You have zozes, beautiful eyes, or something like that. So you see what's happening here. You have zo is the full form, and zo is the shortened form. Now, of course, though, you can't do this with every single word, because there are just so many of these guys. And you can imagine, an entire lexicon of nouns. You can only do it with so many. So these are called the kind of zo type words, or class A words, but I'm calling them this for this presentation because it's easier. All right. Anyway, so yeah, small closed class, because you can't have every single one that, like if you probably have in this language well over 40 stem types that begin with the suffix zo, right? Or begin with the sounds zo, and you can't have them all have the same form. So like the question is, what do you do for words that are like mitzin, which is the word for child, that are either longer or morphologically complex, or basically don't fall into one of these patterns? that's where I came back to these generic words for the verbs, where I had these generic words that were, changing transitives into intransitives. I liked that idea, and so I came back to it to create basically a classifier situation. You might also know them as measure words. We see them in something like Japanese or Mandarin. So I used, so basically the nouns fall into these types. There are 12 word classes. There's the Zor type, the Zoh type, which are just one very small class of irregulars at this point. And then you have the other 11 classes, and this is how those classes work. So starting with this grammatical pattern, this grammatical structure as a pattern, hul tzvapin, I can do that better. Hul tzvapin. That's better. All right. So the word tzvapin means peace. Hul means food. And just with plain juxtaposition, you get this interpretation that it means a piece of food. So using that as a model, I decided to create a series of classifiers. Not as many as you have in like in something like Japanese. A smaller set. I think there's like 14. So if you have mitsun, then you have this word man, vak. It shortens to va. And actually it shortens in a very specific way because, and that's right. Sorry. The words that are, this is crucial. All right. The words that are becoming classifiers are Zor type words. They're the ones that shorten. And that's why they're being used as classifiers, because they're a part of that small set. What's interesting is that they further shortened just due to the erosion of time and evolution and all that. So the classifier one has a short vowel, va. The actual Zor type word vak has a long vowel. And so then what you can do is this. Mitsun vanit, one child. Mitsun varik, many children. Mitsun vazes, beautiful children. And so basically you use that little word man as just a bare classifier for animate words like child. And then there are other types. So vel is the word for cloth. Soit is the word for roll. That shortens to so. And then so you get vel sonit, vel sorik, vel sozes. And basically this is the entire set of them. So all of these, of course, have some sort of historical antecedent, right? Each of these come from a separate word. They all have their own nice etymologies and grammaticalization stories. But that's about the run of them. So that's, how many is that? What's L? What is that, like 10 or 11? I don't want to count those. Why didn't I do numbers instead of letters? All right. 12, thank you. Now I'm going to remember forever for the rest of my life that L means 12. Oh, and it's got an L in it. Oh, that's really useful. All right. I like that. Okay. So, anyway, basically when I create a language, when I'm done, the competence that I have with that language is basically analogous to what you just saw. So I remember the grammar of this language very, very well. I may not remember all of the types, but as I work with them, like I know a lot of them. Like I always remember the type C ones. And I know exactly how the grammar of the language works. What I don't remember are words like this. So like I just looked these up and I came across them in my dictionary. I'm like, oh, those are cool. So avrat is a word for sand. I didn't remember that. If I know that I had a word for sand, I probably could have guessed it was class H, but I just didn't remember what the word was. Or something like epit, which is to walk, to stand on four legs. Like there's no way I'm remembering a word like that. So in effect, the type of competence that I have with my language is roughly like this. So come on, little fella. Okay, there we go. So this is Japanese. And it says, let's see, watashi wa ino no mae ni suate imasu, right? By the way, I learned Japanese from a book, so I don't know how well I pronounce. But anyway, so this is actual Japanese. But anybody who's studied Japanese as a second language is probably familiar with this point of study, where you get something like this, where it's like, and this is exactly like I'm going through the book, and it's like, teimasu. It's like, okay, I got that, but I just don't remember all of these kanji. So it's like you can, if you've studied Japanese a while, it's like you can do that. It's like you can look at the sentence kind of like, okay, I figure out what's going on here. I kind of know what's being said, but I don't remember that, or that. I'll always remember watashi. This is an interesting thing. I don't know if anybody else has had this experience. When I was studying Japanese, I was just kind of going through the book. I didn't actually try to write it. So despite the fact that I will never, in my entire life, till my dying day, I'm never going to forget what the kanji for watashi looks like, or what the kanji associated with taberu looks like. I'll never, ever forget those. I cannot write them at all. It's really embarrassing. Like, I sit down there, I'm like there's two parts to it, and there's kind of a stick thing, and I just, it's really weird, because like I can read them, I know them, but I just, I can't write them. Bizarre thing. Anyway, so I want to go back and learn how to do that one day. But anyway, so yeah, so this is basically what it's like for me with my own languages. I can do this. I know the grammar, and I can remember like the phonological forms for the grammatical bits, but the lexemes themselves, they just kind of go straight out of my head, except for certain ones that I do kind of remember. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, this is me not remembering them. This is basically what I feel like. I'll show you the like kind of how I remember what I remember, right? Oh yeah, okay, that's right. Okay, so this is precisely how it works when I'm translating. I will, let's say I'll get a line, they'll say, please translate this line, where it's like, like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a stupid line where you could use the word twist. All I can think of is, come on baby, let's do the twist. But probably not that, like, like, I don't know. Just twist the knob. That would be something where they're instructing somebody to do something. All right. So what will happen is that I will go to, I'll say, all right, I know that I can translate this into this language. Let's say I'm doing kinukaz, in fact. And I'll say, all right, I know how the grammar of that works. I know that I have a word for twist, so let's just go to the dictionary and figure out which word it was. And I'll go to the dictionary with my document, and it'll give me that annoying little error beep sound and tell me nothing found. I'm like, are you kidding me? I created a word for twist. I know I did. But in fact, what I'm actually remembering is having created a word for twist in High Valyrian, palegon, to twist or to rotate, or like fiazolat, to twist up in Dothraki, where that kind of means to twist up. Becomes from fiez, the word for rope in Dothraki, and you could have like afiazolat means to twist something transitively. So, and then there's this word where in Castithan, ugalu meant to twist in the old form of the language. It now is pronounced pohalu, and it means to wince or to flinch away. So what, in fact, I end up remembering, sorry, no, there's even more. That's right, I forgot. Then there's chakisu, which is to twist about. It's related to the word rikisa in Erathian for wind, so that's where this word for twist comes from. And basically, I look at myself like this and like go, really, dude? It's like, because I've created the word twist in all these other languages, and I remember distinctly the experience of creating a word for something like twist in English. I just will not have done it in the language that I need it for. And that's when I get annoyed at myself for not having created it. And I do that a lot. So many head desk moments where it's just like, oh my God, are you serious? And then the thing is, especially for words like that, like twist or turn, or very complex words that end up having a million different meanings in the world's languages that are very, very kind of difficult to piece together. I just hate creating those words because it takes a really long time to do it right and to do something that makes sense for the language in question. So it's just like, anyway. By the way, this is my kitty Roman. There he is, looking annoyed at me for taking a picture of him. He's so cute. He's a little bite machine, though. I like going on trips because the cuts on my hands heal. I'm going back tomorrow. He'll bite him up again. All right. So Anyway, so when it comes to the actual lexemes that I remember, it's kind of a weird thing. There's usually a weird reason for the words that just stick in my mind. Like, I remember this is a word of High Valyrian, vilibasma. I remember it because I hate it. I just think it's the worst word in the world. And I hate saying it, and I hate using it, and I use it all the time. So I always remember that word. Then there's this word, tilo. And I remember this word very distinctly because I didn't invent it. Generally, when I'm working on television shows, I invent all of the language, all of the words. Every so often, there will be a rogue writer who thinks it'll be fun to create a word, and I kind of have to incorporate it in some way. What was written in the script was this. And so based on my very regular romanization, I said, okay, that word is telo, and it's pronounced exactly like that. And I didn't think about it, and so I added it into the dictionary like this. And in fact, it had a whole like etymology behind it. It was related to other words. Then we get on set, and they're pronouncing it tilo. And I'm like, are you kidding me? An E pronounced the way like it is in English? What season is this? So then I had to go back and change it. Anyway, so yeah, I'll never forget that word for a very, very specific type of bridal mask worn in casteth-in weddings. That's a useful one to hang on to. So then there's this word, zigadio. It's from Dothraki, and it just means like he, she, or it doesn't need. It's just, not a super useful word, but I remember it because I love saying it. Zigadio. Oh, it just rolls off the tongue. I didn't have a zigadio, whatever. Zigadio. Oh, it's just, it doesn't sound like cigaros, does it? Cigaros. Sorry, all right. Anyway, so yeah, zigadio. Then there's this word, tubaket, which means command. And I remember this word for command because it has this etymology. So by the way, you can see, well, that one was like, an implosive B. The other one was a regular B. But it basically melded into a geminate B, and then all geminates were lost. But because there was kind of the double B there, it reminds me of this word from Arabic, shubak, which means window. And I have kind of an association with the word for window in Arabic, shubak, because my professor of Arabic was a big fan of it, especially the plural, shubabik. And he always liked to refer to the Windows operating system as that. But of course, anyway, so the reason I remember this word for command is because it kind of looks like the word for window in Arabic. And of course, there's, right here, the command button on a Windows keyboard has a window on it. So, I'll never forget the word, tsubakat because of that. So that's kind of like the weird relationship that I have with my languages. And what I've learned, basically, is that language creating, so in other words, the active, actively creating a language is not the same thing as language learning. And this point was especially driven home for me when I went to the 6th Language Creation Conference this year in Horsham, England. And one of the presenters there, Jim Hopkins, delivered his talk, his presentation at LCC 6 entirely in his conlang, Itlani. The whole thing. It was stunning. And incidentally, the topic of his discussion was how to make your own created language more a part of your life so that you can speak it fluently. It was rather appropriate. And what was even better than that is that his good friend, Tony Harris, who created his own language, Alursa, he learned Jim Hopkins' Itlani well enough that he could translate from Itlani for the audience into English as he was speaking. Yeah, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So yeah, what I've discovered, I was trying to come up with a good analogy, and I think I came up with a really good one. Like people who, for example, make violins aren't necessarily going to be the best violin players, but I don't know how to make violins, and I can't verify that that's actually true. But it seems true. It's a kind of an aura of truthiness to it. Anyway, so it's like with what I've discovered is that while you're creating the languages, there are going to be things that you remember, things you pull out, things that are always going to stick with you. But it doesn't beat the actual language learning process, especially for me, where I feel like the best way to do it is to work with a native speaker who speaks it absolutely fluently, who you can bounce ideas off of, who you can make mistakes with so you can get feedback on it and hear the language in context. That's what I need in order to be able to be fluent in one of my languages. So essentially, I'm just kind of waiting for somebody to learn one, learn it to fluency, then come back to me. I'm like, all right, cool, now I can do this. Anyway, but yeah, so that is my story as a language creator. And so yeah, if you come up to me and ask me to write things in one of my languages, I will try my best, but I will probably make some crucial errors. So just bear that in mind. Anyway, so then there's this. Yeah, it's going. Keeps going. Wait for it. It's going. Almost. Getting there. Thank you. All right. Got plenty of time for questions. Good.
So when you make stems for words, like you're talking about, are those just random sounds that come to your mind, or do they have any connotations with anything?
Okay, so this is an interesting question. So stems specifically, when you create a word, or when I create a word, I go through a very specific process. So like for any given language. The first thing I do is I start off, and the first question is this word appropriate for whatever cultural context I'm working in? So like, with something like Dothraki, if it's a word like computer, it's just not appropriate to the cultural context, to the fictional context, so it's thrown out immediately. If it is appropriate, then I have to decide, is this going to be a native root that goes back, many generations, or is it going to be derived from something that I already have? If it's derived, then I decide, okay, what morphological process am I going to derive it from? Is it going to be zero derivation? Is it going to be some sort of a metaphorical extension? And I do that and set the word down. If it's going to be a native root, then I decide, first, if it underwent any changes itself, like how the word silly in English used to mean happy. Is it going to undergo any changes, or is it going to be more or less stable? Then of course there's the question of how the sounds change over time and all that. So when I get to the point where it's like, all right, I've answered all these questions, I ferreted everything out, I just need to create a phonological form for this root, it's just whatever comes to mind. And I don't know where it comes from, but and I know that there are a number of language creators that actually have a lot of problems with this. Some solve them by using automatic stem generators, which are ingenious, and are actually useful so that you make sure you don't fall into any tried and true patterns. But I've never had that problem. I just look at it and think, all right, this feels right for this language. Sometimes I will go against what I'm thinking of if I know that, for example, that there are some phonemes that are being underused, but there's no reason for them to be underused given the phonology of the language. Then I'll go against whatever I'm thinking of and create something specifically where I'm like, all right, this should be better represented, so I'm going to do that. Sometimes if it's a culture that's completely unconnected to our own world, then that's where you can do things like, throw in cute references. Like like my wife, Erin, she's got like a word in most of my languages where the root is something like, erin or erin, depending on whatever the phonology of the language is, if it supports it. So in Dothraki, erin means, I'm sorry, not with a trill, erin means kind. And I think in one of the other languages it means, in the Castilian language, I gave her erino. Erino is the word for tea, because she's a big tea drinker. She's big into it. So yeah, you can always do things like that if there's really no connection. Obviously for something like Trigeta slang in the 100, where everything is based on the actual English language, there are no references there unless they make sense within the context. So it's like, I don't think 100 years from now everybody is going to know who my wife is and are going to randomly associate her name with some sort of meaning. So, it wouldn't be appropriate there. But yeah, so that's what I do. Okay. I'm sorry. It's okay. So whoever has the mic, got it. Okay. Yes.
Thank you for that excellent talk. It was very interesting. So in what ways do you incorporate the cultures of these societies into the languages in terms of not just grammar, but also phonology and writing system?
Okay, so basically, depending on whatever the cultural context is, most of the time the culture is going to inform the vocabulary more so than anything else. There isn't really a tie between like culture and phonology. It's just random. I mean, we certainly come up with, I would say, stereotypical associations now because of the world that we live in and the phonology of the languages that those people speak. But realistically, it's just totally arbitrary, so it doesn't matter. And grammatically, it's pretty much the same thing. Writing systems, that's where you have to know about the history of the people. So, for example, Dothraki doesn't have a writing system because in the books themselves, George R. R. Martin states that they don't have a writing system, that it's just an oral language. So it would be inappropriate to create any kind of writing system for that. So for our use, we just have the romanization, which I make regular and very nice and easy so that everybody the actors can see it and pretty much know how it's pronounced. When it comes to the writing systems that I actually can create, then it's a question of, all right, well, who are these people? How far advanced technologically are they? So like what state would their writing system be at? Then you go back as far as you possibly can and think about how did writing evolve on this planet? Most writing systems that we have, that we know of, started off pictographic and then went into any number of various stages. So if it's not too far advanced, I go back to the pictographic stage. In the case of like Defiance, where the aliens are like 2,000 years more technologically advanced than we are, I figured it was probably enough time depth I didn't have to go all the way back. So I started at a little bit of a later stage than that, at a crucial juncture before they switched from writing on something like paper with something like stylus. So I started before that with more angular characters. Then when I moved to that system, to the stylus, the medium that I was imagining, it would benefit you not to really pick up the pen. So it transitioned from these really angular glyphs that had lots of different parts where you would be kind of picking up and carving to singular glyphs. So it kind of like went almost from an alphabetic type thing, or almost from an abjadic type thing to an abugida. And the glyphs went from really angular to really smooth. And so that's the kind of process I go through when I'm creating a writing system. And so yeah, there the fictional history really does inform it.
Okay, so you're obviously very informed in the sort of the structure and the sound systems cross-linguistically. So I have sort of two questions. First, does the studio executives care? I mean, do they say, "Wow, that's really great that you've created an object, subject, verb language," or that you've got implosives and adjectives, or they're just like, pretty good?
Okay, so yes and no. Yes and no. So first of all, they would not know any of the details. They really like that the details are there. So it's like, we don't know what this is, but we like that it's there. And so and they love I've had producers that say they just kind of show me around and tell them that thing that you did in the language, and then I'll say whatever it was, and isn't that impressive sounding? And it's like, yeah. So it's kind of like that level of thing, but essentially, it's kind of like they hired me for the depth, not to know the details. And specifically, what they're hoping is that fans who engage with it are going to appreciate the details. And the view that I have on it is, I was basically thinking of the long term. It's honestly, if you create a language for a television show or anything, you have to be, the only reason for doing it is thinking of the long term. So not just the initial viewing, but repeated viewings and then further engagement with whatever the franchise is. Because if you plan to just do a one-off, it probably wouldn't matter. Without any prior coaching, nobody can just understand a language that they've heard for the very first time in a 30-minute television show. At least I don't think. Maybe if there was somebody who could, they would be here. But So it's really more like for imagining fans, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, who are rewatching the DVDs, who are interested in the culture and looking at every little aspect of the production. Because with language, you can actually, take it down and interact with it the way that you can't with a physical prop on a set. You can look at it, you can look at pictures of it, but you can't actually grab the actual thing out of the screen. Whereas with a language, in effect, you can. I mean, it's just an idea expressed via, either visual or oral means. So you can actually take the real thing down and work with it. And so that's that's always been my view on it.
Hi. If one wanted to learn one of the languages fluently, who has the best pronunciation on the show?
Which show?
Game of Thrones.
And which language?
Dothraki.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, so the best. Elias Gable was pretty good. Jason Momoa's pronunciation was extremely unique. So he was really, really good, but he spoke in what I want to call like kind of the rock star way. So like he had this thing. This is really interesting with your linguist hat on. He took essentially, if you wanted to write an A goes to B in the environment of CD rule, his high vowels lowered to mid vowels at the end of a word. So if he were pronouncing Dothraki, he wouldn't say Dothraki, he'd say Dothrake. But he did it consistently across the language. I kind of thought of it as kind of like, changing baby to baby for, rock stars. It was just really cool. And it was surprisingly consistent across episodes. I thought it was just awesome. So, you could definitely use him as a model, but you'd have to keep that in mind, I guess. And oh yeah, Amrita Acharya was just wonderful. I think if I had to choose one person who was the best, it would probably be her, Amrita Acharya. She played Eerie in the first season of Game of Thrones and a part of the second season. And I met her about a year and a half after her character had been sadly killed off, despite the character still being alive in the books. Always surprises. Anyway, so I met her like a year and a half later. She still had all of her lines memorized. She had absolutely no idea what they meant, but she could deliver them exactly the way she did on screen. It was amazing. I can't remember them after I translate them. I have to read them straight off when I'm recording them for the actors. Incidentally, by the way, if somebody was going to ask that question, I record all of the lines on every single show I work on. So that's how they do it. They hear me, they figure out exactly how they want to deliver it, then they just repeat over and over and over again. Most of the actors don't know what it means by the time they're performing, and certainly probably forget them afterwards.
First of all, I just want to say thanks. I really enjoyed this because I myself actually got involved in my first conlanging group in the early 90s, so this has been something...
Conlang list?
Yeah, conlanging.
How long were you on the listserv?
For several years, it was one out of Brown University.
That's the one I'm on. But I'm
not on it anymore. But I've been conlanging ever since.
By the way, early conlang list member right here, Thomas Lee. Do you remember him?
I don't actually.
Okay. All right. What's your name?
Chris Carter.
Chris what?
Carter.
Carter. Oh, like the football player. Cool. All right.
Basically.
Yeah. All right.
Or X-Files. So anyway, I appreciate all this, even though I've never seen a single episode of Game of Thrones. Sorry.
Or Defiance or Dominion or The 100 or Starcrossed or Thor: The Dark World or Penny Dreadful.
Some of those.
Okay. Cool.
Anyway, so my approach to conlanging was always more academic because I went to school for linguistics, and so I was always
Me too. Hooray. What school did you go
to? William and Mary.
Okay. Go Bears. UC Berkeley.
So I was always exploring kind of applications of ideas in linguistics as inspiration for, let me see if this works, let me try that. What I was curious about actually was the practical application that you used in entertainment, because I can always think of what I want to experiment with trying new languages, but what are some of the limiting factors in entertainment that you have to take into consideration, like pronounceability by actors, when you're creating something that, that'll never work when I actually try to use it at studio?
Yeah. Okay, so I gave you one, which is, for example, what I talked about, the issue of plurality with nouns, where it's easier to be more flexible because you never know if it's going to change on the day of. That's why none of the languages I've created for shows has a dual, because I can never be certain that I'm going to be referring to exactly two of something. So it would be really bizarre to have a language that had a dual that never used it ever. And it's kind of like the other thing with Dothraki. You know, like all languages have billions of words for horse, right? Like English has tons of words for horse. You usually only use horse though, unless you're in some sort of like an equestrian context. So like with Dothraki though, I figured that they would probably, you know, over the generic word for horse, they would use words like mare, stallion, mustang, probably more. But I never know what the horse is going to be like on set. So the only word you ever hear is horse, this generic word for horse. I don't even know if Dothraki would have one, to be honest. You know, like some languages don't have a generic word for tree. That's not the base level term that they have. I'm not even sure if Dothraki would have a base level term for horse. But they do because of the realities of the production. So that was one, and I was trying to think of another one. Oh yeah, with the pronunciation, there's like only so much I can do, because the way that this works is, first of all, the actors usually are pretty happy about like giving it a go and just trying whatever pronunciation. But they're not the gatekeepers. The producer is the gatekeeper. So usually what I do when I'm having my initial discussion is I come up with, you know, some sort of a phonological form and like just a fake sentence that uses the phonology, so I can demonstrate to them the sound that I'm thinking of. And so I usually send it off to them, and I usually always get the same comment back. It's like, oh, it's really cool, but can you get rid of that throaty sound that sounds like Arabic? And I just roll my eyes and just like, all right, fine. What's wrong with kha? There's nothing wrong with it. It's a perfectly beautiful sound. I bet most people who say that don't even realize that the sound is in Spanish. Like they would never describe Spanish as a guttural, harsh language, even though it has a velar fricative. Come on! In fact, it's got two of them. No, the G one, the voiced one is kind of soft. So anyway, so yeah, there's usually something like that. I can't be as phonologically adventurous as I'd like to. Like for example, I'll never do a tone language, not even a register tone language. I would love to, but I just don't think it would come out right. I think it would end up sounding, honestly, kind of awful. Like I think the actors would do their best shot, and it would sound really tinny and fake, which is disappointing, because, you know, I'd love to do a tone language, especially a register tone language, actually. I love register tone languages. And I would actually probably do clicks before I did a register tone language. But even there, you probably couldn't do clicks the way that you see them, where there are an entire series of clicks, you know, nasalized clicks, aspirated clicks, labialized clicks, and so on. It would probably be like, okay, here's the one click. And, you know, and like 50% of the actors would get it. And then sometimes you'd hit something like, you know, bala, gana, it's just like, So yeah, there are definitely practical concerns. And the other big one is, of course, just deadlines, which are murder. Oh, God. I love being able to just work on it for as long as I want. But then every so often I just get 2 weeks, which literally happened for Star-Crossed. I had 2 weeks. I didn't like that. I made it work, but yeah. So those are just some of the considerations.
Okay, what's your favorite language to date that you've created, and why? Sorry, my voice is going. And then the second question would be, if you're making a language, say Dothraki, does it have to have like ergatives and like the kha, or could you perhaps make something that would be like Polynesian and very like soft, or does it have to kind of fit what the producers thinks, or do you have more, I guess, agency to do what you want?
Okay. For some reason, I forgot the first question again. Can you repeat it? Your favorite language. Favorite language. Okay, yeah. My favorite language is Erathian that I created for Sci-Fi's Defiance. I absolutely love it. I just did a bunch of fun stuff. Like, I had created a language very early on with noun class systems, and I think that I did it abominably. So like in this one, I'm like, all right, now I'm going to do it right. And I just, it's so much fun. It's so much fun to create words in. I love pronouncing it, and I was really sad that we got like only like 1 or 2 lines in it in the last season of Defiance. Mostly it was in the other languages. But yeah, Erathian is my favorite. And then, so yeah, when it comes to like what the producers want, first, there's actually two different answers there. Yeah, I can do an ergative language whenever I want. It doesn't make a difference. It's all for them. It's the pronunciation, and so for them, like it's just that I just have to do it in a certain way so that it matches their sound expectations so that they can sign off. Then I can pretty much do whatever I want as long as it's close enough to what I originally said. But there's so much that you can do just with the inflection of your voice beyond whatever the phonology is. So it's like, if they say like suddenly, oh, this is too harsh sounding, I'll just do another take where I speak it a little more softly, and they're like, that's perfect, wonderful change. I'm like, So that's part of it. The other thing was like for Dothraki. If you look at the structure of Dothraki, it actually looks very Indo-European. That is, there are cases. It's a small case system. There's an inflectional verb. The word order is SVO, VSO, and embedded clauses. But it's very kind of Indo-European. And the reason for that, though, was because there was actual textual examples in the book that I had to make sure would still be grammatical when I was done. So there was no way I could have done like an agglutinative language or a polysynthetic language for Dothraki, because it would be really weird that all of the Dothraki examples in the book are really like SVO, like small verb, things like that. And then everything else are like these huge monster verbs. It just wouldn't make sense. So that was a kind of unique constraint for Dothraki.
Hi, I wanted to ask about the phonological inventory as well, but I think you covered that pretty extensively. So I'd be curious to know, how did you get into this line of work in the first place? Yeah,
so especially if there are any conlingers here, what happened is that the producers of Game of Thrones contacted the Language Creation Society, who was kind of blown away by it. And so the president of the Language Creation Society, whose name is Sai, decided to put on a competition to see who would get the job. And so I competed for it. There were like more than 40 that expressed interest, and then people dropped out along the way. So I think there were 30 proposals that were passed on to the first round. Of those, that was winnowed down to 5. I was one of the 5. And then we beefed them up even more, and the 5 proposals were sent to the producers, who eventually chose mine. So that was how that happened. It was kind of an ugly process. Like, I produced over 300 pages of material for this, and essentially everybody, all of the finalists, translated all the material in the pilot. So it was kind of like, rather than being a competition to see who would get the job, everybody just did the job, and HBO decided who was going to get paid for it. And they also owned all of the applications. So if you didn't get the job, you could never use that material again. It was really kind of a bummer. But when I took over the presidency of the Language Creation Society, we did another big one for the movie Noah. Anybody see that? Yeah, one person. So, I ran that one. I ran that competition, and so what I did was I just had 3 pages of application, and I specified what was going to be on each of the 3 pages, and I said what the font size and font was supposed to be. And so, like, you could do that in a weekend. And I had them send these little proposals off, and then the producers chose one, and then they went from there to create the language and translate the dialogue. So that was better, but of course for that one, they ended up cutting all of the language entirely, which was a real bummer. So if you've seen Noah, that's why you don't remember anything. It was supposed to be for the rock angel guys, who they had so I guess they just spoke English? Yeah, it was kind of weird, actually. Yeah, it was a little weird. But you never know. You never know with Hollywood. It's exactly the type of thing that can happen. You do all this work and suddenly it's like, well, no, it's just not going to work, so it's cut. That's kind of life. But he did get paid. That was Bill Weldon, by the way, since I don't think he got a credit in the movie because his work never appeared. But yeah, Bill Weldon created that language for Noah, and he did a great job. Yeah. So that was how I got it. The ones after that, it was just Game of Thrones being big, I think.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
So.
you.